Hi there, today's video is gonna be a lot. It's gonna be a lot today. Maybe you saw the timestamp on this video, maybe you didn't. Maybe you just blindly follow me and click on anything that I post. So in that case, welcome my disciple. As a lot of you know, I just recovered from a gum graft surgery, yay. So that means that I watched an ungodly amount of stuff during my recovery, and we also have a lot of new releases to talk about. But I also watched a lot of old stuff too, and if you're new to these recaps, then this is the structure that I follow. First, I'll talk about all the TV shows that I watched in the month, and this month we have season 10 of American Horror Story, we have Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, we have The Sandman, and more. Next, I go over all the non-horror movies that I watched, and so this month that includes a lot of new releases like Bullet Train and Day Shift and Beast. Next will be every horror movie that I rewatched during the month, and today we have some juicy ones like The Descent and Hereditary. After that, I cover all my new watches of old horror movies, so movies that came out prior to 2022 that I just haven't seen yet. Although that'll be a really dry department today because I've been watching all of Wes Craven's old work in preparation for that video, so I'm not going to talk about them. However, I did finally watch Tusk, so there's that. Next, we will talk about all new horror releases, so that'll be anything from 2022, but we have a lot from August. This will of course include The Invitation, They Slash Them, Prey, and more. This recap will be just a little bit different today though. I finally got Screambox just to do the month-long free trial, and also because I'm doing my research for my It comparison. They have a new Pennywise documentary that I'll get into later, but it's a relatively new streaming service that exclusively streams horror movies. So there are quite a bit of movies for me to talk about from Screambox, and I'll go over my thoughts on whether or not I think that you should have the streaming service. So kick back, grab a drink, grab a snack, grab a cheeky little puff if you fancy, and let's get right into it. Actually, hold, I'm gonna have a cheeky little puff because today is it's gonna be a long one. So cheers, baby! Ooh, that'll do. Maybe just one more. There's nobody here to stop me. Happy fall. Right out the gates, we are starting with season 10 of American Horror Story. Honestly, not the worst thing to grace my screen this month. I know a lot of people talk shit about this season, but y'all do this every single year to American Horror Story. Granted, the past few years, it has been warranted, but this was finally an original season. It's split into two parts. The first part is this kind of vampire story, and the second part is about aliens. Red Tide, the vampire one, is about this writer who essentially becomes a vampire to write best-selling screenplays. It's a fun little tale about selling your soul for success. Nice little capitalism jab. I thought it was pretty good, or at least worth watching. Seasons 8 and 9, Apocalypse and 1984, were both so horribly unoriginal. So maybe that's why I'm not as averse to season 10. But the alien story of the last 4 episodes is very weird. That's the best descriptor I have. I can't offer much more. It's just bizarre. And there's not really a plot. It's sort of just exploring a what if. It's an exploration of several conspiracy theories about Marilyn Monroe's death, the presidency of Richard Nixon, things like that, which would normally be my cup of tea, but their exploration was pretty bizarre, like I said. Also, with how gay Ryan Murphy's shows are, in this season, they played out the theory that JFK had an affair with Marilyn Monroe when JFK literally had a live-in best friend at the White House. That little boy was gay, come on now. And the worst thing about it was probably just how anticlimactic the ending was. Can't really say I recommend that one, but the first story of the season I think is worth watching. So moving on to Pretty Little Liars Original Sin. 20 years ago, a series of tragic events almost tore Millwood apart. Now in the present day, a brand new set of little liars find themselves tormented by an unknown assailant. This is just one of those shows that you watch for the vibes. It's very bad. It does not live up to the original show in any type of way, but it does bring one new thing. There are so many horror references. It's really more of a horror show than the original, which was more of a drama. So that obviously made it a lot of fun for me to watch, and it also feels a lot like MTV Scream. They never made season 4 of Scream, so HBO was just like, maybe we should do it. Like I said, you just watch it for the vibes because the story, not great. Not great at all. Some parts of it are very predictable, which I actually don't really mind. But then there was this huge twist reveal that came out of nowhere, which I actually didn't like. Bit of an Uno reverse card on the the usual course of events. I typically like when surprises come out of left field, but this one was just like, they didn't even really drop any crumbs for it, so it's not like it would be any fun on a rewatch either. So crazy twist, but still lackluster? I don't know. However, this show is still worth watching. It has immaculate, spooky, fall-time Halloween vibes. I also really like some of the characters, even though they're nowhere close to the icon status of the characters of the original show, but to be fair, Pretty Little Liars defied natural law. It was so chaotic and diabolical, and frankly, I don't have time to get into all the reasons why, but this includes the main characters sleeping with teachers, one of them develops an Adderall addiction, they blinded a girl. So obviously, a lot of the stuff that made the original show iconic was scaled back. They modernize it in many ways. They also make a lot of commentary on rape culture, which I think is something important for young women to be seeing. I really wish that I had a show like this in high school. We were not well educated enough on consent back then at all. Kids these days just have so many more resources to things like cultural sensitivity as well. Like, they're just better equipped. Though I have heard some horror stories of recent about teachers having to deal with their male students that love Andrew Tate, that walking, talking piece of fuck. But that man is banned from pretty much everywhere now, so cheers. Tastes like juicy melon. Anyway, it's kind of so bad it's good. It's a very mediocre show, but in the best way. Up next would be The Sandman, and ooh, woo baby. This is a new slight horror fantasy drama on Netflix based on the Neil Gaiman comics. It's an anthology that follows Dream, the entity responsible for the realm of the dreaming and all our dreams and nightmares. Guys, I cannot stress to you how badly you need to see this show. Like, I'm gonna throw up. I'll have to save my thoughts though, because I already did about a 2-hour live stream talking with you guys about The Sandman. I broke down every single episode by its most important plot points and shared all my thoughts. So I'll save you the time on my review for now, but I've since found Neil Gaiman on Twitter, and that man is such a treasure. He talked in an interview about how he leaked a script for The Sandman because it was, quote, the worst thing he'd ever read by anybody. So someone said that he could be jailed for that, I guess for leaking the script or something, and he said, I think that the statute of limitations is up from 25 years ago, but I would wear those handcuffs with pride. He's responded to some casting criticisms. There's a lot of people that make the complaint that Death should not be played by a black woman, or that Lucifer should be played by a woman. Like, grow up. So he's responded to some people and their complaints saying things like, well, we decided to choose this person because it was specifically someone you wouldn't like, and everybody else was cast based on talent. This is what you call not selling out. His PR team is probably sitting there going, maybe not the best move, maybe don't, but he says it like it is, which I really respect, because if you couldn't tell, I am basically cementing myself out of any kind of professional setting. You watch one of my videos and you probably go, yep, that girl's never working in an office. Nope. And that was planned. That was intentional. It's showbiz or no biz, baby. Make yourself unemployable. I'm just kidding. Don't take my advice, ever. Anyway, let's move on to the next show, which is called Sprung. This show follows recently released inmates as they acclimate to a world of disease and try to make a living robbing local assholes. It basically picks up right where the pandemic started, when nobody knew what was going on, so it's hilarious. I love the actors too, because 2 of them played Bert and Virginia on this show called Raising Hope that I watched so much growing up, and it's also from the same creator as Raising Hope, so the same team of people. And even though it's really funny because it deals with characters that are idiots, it's still really emotional as well. I went to an amazing screening of this show at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and they actually had free food. So they gave us these little $1 million bills with the actors' faces on it, and then on the back it says where to stream it. We also got these little bracelets, and they're like the boobies bracelets. But the food that they were serving was Trejo's Tacos and Donuts. If you didn't know, Danny Trejo owns his own food establishments, and they're delicious. We got free stickers too. I might put you on my laptop. There were also lots of photo ops there. We didn't do any of them this time, but then some of the actors and the creator came up on stage to do a little Q&A before it started. You don't understand how much I love Raising Hope, how much I love these people. So that was really exciting to see, and I ended up loving the show. I'm really excited to watch the rest of it, but I only really recommend it for comedy fans. Echoes is the next show that I tried to watch. It's a new psychological thriller on Netflix. I lasted about 20 minutes into the first episode before I realized it's not for me. It's so corny. It's one of those semi-melodramas, kind of like what I would imagine Grey's Anatomy to be, except there's no humor in it. Just not great acting. I wasn't hooked. It was frustrating to watch for some reason, but it was #1 in TV shows on on Netflix for a little bit, so do with that what you will. It's now time to get into all of the non-horror movies that I watched. Last month, I talked about roughly the first half of the Star Wars franchise, so my discussion on the second half is incoming. Kicking it off with The Empire Strikes Back. This is largely hailed as the best of the original trilogy, at least it has the best rating on Letterboxd, and of course one of the best twists in cinematic history, the "no, I am your father" thing. But it's definitely my least favorite of the original trilogy. What do you want from me? Because in my opinion, the best of the original trilogy is Return of the Jedi. You get the best of the original trio of characters, you get Ewoks, and you get the epic conclusion to that original trilogy. Come on, let's be reasonable. Now, the newest trilogy has a lot of issues, but I still thoroughly enjoy The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi in particular finally did something that was really different, but it almost broke some people's brains. It's a really interesting theme that's super new, but also ties in so well to the original movies. It's about leaving the past behind you because it explores what happens when you cling to the past. It's a very interesting theme. And then The Rise of Skywalker ruins everything. It completely retcons that story direction and goes fan service. Pfft, no stakes. Pew pew. Rey is actually Jesus now. Excuse me. So bad, such a terrible conclusion to the franchise, especially because my dad and I had watched every movie leading up to it, and we also watched Obi-Wan Kenobi. So yeah, in the future, I don't even know if I'm gonna want to rewatch this trilogy. I mean, I want to rewatch The Force Awakens and Last Jedi, but then I would have to admit that The Rise of Skywalker does still indeed exist. Anyways, that does it for Star Wars for now. If you want to see my ranking of the franchise too, my dad and I did do a ranking on a live stream a little while back. We got very, very deeply into that franchise during that discussion. Anyways, up next we have a new release, which would be Bullet Train. Bullet Train follows Brad Pitt's character Ladybug, who is an assassin that just wants to complete his newest mission in peace. However, due to his terrible luck, he gets caught up in a wild scheme. I think my Letterboxd review sums it up really well. Nothing makes sense, and that's what makes sense about it. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. This movie is so fun. It's so stupid, hilarious, just balls to the wall crazy action. You don't need to worry about anything else. I have a particular soft spot for this one because I love the action style of Kingsman, and this was like that times 5, like just as bonkers if not more so. I fucking loved this movie. It's gonna be a must-have on Blu-ray for sure. Also, Aaron Taylor Johnson, whenever you realize that you were groomed by your current wife, I am currently single, so that was a joke, but I still find their relationship to be very crusty. He and Brian Tyree Henry were very close to being the best part of this movie, but Brad Pitt? For too long, Hollywood was like, this is a cool guy. This is a leading man. No. They have finally realized that he's a comedian. He's a character actor. Yeah, okay, he's good in dramas too, I know. But I think we unfortunately have to thank Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because I think that that set Brad Pitt on this newer direction of his career. Or maybe it's just the Ryan Reynolds-ification of Brad Pitt, who knows. There were also a ton of cameos in the movie that were totally unexpected and hilarious. I'll tell you what wasn't so funny though, this film. This bullshit right here. Day Shift follows Jamie Foxx's character as he hunts vampires aside a bumbling apprentice played by Dave Franco. This movie further convinced me that Netflix is operating one of the largest money laundering scams the world has ever known. Because what do you mean this movie cost $100 million? What do you mean? This movie was so dull, so devoid of life, it was very much giving AI generated. So here are my only praises of the movie. First of all, the action was pretty insane. That was the only reason I kept watching the entire movie. The rest of it was some of the worst filler attempt at a meaningful story I've ever seen. Secondly, Snoop Dogg has a really great entrance. It's pretty much exactly what you would expect from him.
Deer hunting, beer guzzling, boot wearing Southern man.
You know, me cutting necks and cashing checks.
Thirdly, and my final praise, is this bit of dialogue right here.
It's not Breaking Dawn Part 1, it ain't like that, all right?
And what's your gripe with Breaking Dawn Part 2? It's the exciting conclusion of the whole Twilight Saga. Have you seen Part 2? Bella has her baby now. It's insane. Oh, I wish I was you just to experience that for the first time. You are in for a treat.
It's so rare that we see movies so boldly address Twilight for the cultural reset that it was. It's supposed to be ironic here, but I'm dead serious. But everything else about the movie, I'm telling you, everything else was bad. Don't watch this movie. It's so lame. There's a running gag where Dave Franco's character pees his pants whenever he tries to fight the vampires, and frankly, you deserve better. Luckily, my next non-horror watch was much better, Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. This here classic came out in 1999, and say it with me, that was the year that I was born. It was also the Scooby-Doo movie that I rewatched on TV the most, for sure. It follows the gang and Ben Knight, voiced by Tim Curry, who's an author looking to prove his ancestry innocent of witchcraft. This also takes place in fall in New England and is such a vibe. This is also the birth of one of the most iconic animated bands of all time, the Hex Girls. I even have their sticker on my laptop, big fan. Particularly Sally, she is me and I am her. She was one of my earliest fashion icons. This movie just reminds me of the Scholastic Book Fair. That's what it feels like. I honestly highly recommend it. It's a great witch movie and Tim Curry does some great voice acting. Next would be Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is a classic, so don't need to dwell here. This was also another Hollywood Forever Cemetery watch. I went to see it at an event. Just want to point out something that I said on Letterboxd. Basically, back in the day, Indiana Jones would go out and risk life and limb to steal artifacts from native people. Then he would get mad at a French guy for taking it from him and he would go, "It belongs in a museum," and everyone was just like, "True. Doesn't belong with those native people." Definitely not. No, you're so right, Indiana Jones. Just kind of a bizarre classic in that way because I truly am still so weak for that man. I would fully be that one girl in class who's only there because he's hot. Anyway, on to the next, which would be Beast. This follows a man and his two daughters on their treacherous journey through the plains of Africa as a vengeful lion stalks them. This movie is exactly what you would expect it to be, especially if you saw the trailer. I watched the trailer for this one because I truly did not give a fuck. If you're new here, I am not a trailer kind of girl. They spoil too much. With this movie, there's not much to spoil because the entire thing is just a raw man versus nature, man fighting lion movie. It's fine. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was worth it for the watch, but I won't watch it again. Also, the longer that I've sat with it, the more I realize I really didn't like that movie. The only thing going for it is the crazy scenes with the lions. There actually is a decent amount of suspense and really good jump scares. But that kind of shock value fades, and the only thing that's left is a really annoying attempt at a character development arc. It's painfully cliche. They do the whole dead parent thing. So there's really not too much more to say. I would say it's worth it to go out and see it in theaters if you're a movie-going kind of person. If not, and you don't get out to the theater that much, I'd maybe not waste your trip on this one. So let's move on to all my rewatches of the month. My first rewatch of the month is It from 1990. I watched this one to prep for my huge It comparison video, which is coming out sometime later this month or in October, not sure yet. So I won't be talking about all the It movies too much in this video. All I will say about It from 1990 is that the more times that I've rewatched it, the more that I like it, but it still sits at a 2.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd because it is undoubtedly very corny. The first half is decent, but it really just is not very good. I still enjoy It from 2017, but I don't have quite the same love for it anymore. What keeps me coming back to it is definitely the characters and the atmosphere, and I really like Bill Skarsgård's performance. I'm just not a fan of the scares in the movie the way that I used to be. I've found that the rewatchability of the horror is just not great for this movie when you're not in a theater and Pennywise isn't 20 feet tall. Same thing for It Chapter 2. The scares are worse in this movie, and the ending is very weird. But the actors and the comedy still make it a pretty meaningful watch for me. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I also rewatched Hereditary. I was close to giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 because I think that Midsommar is a better movie, so I was like, okay, I guess I better scale back on Hereditary a little bit. But then I was racking my brain like, dude, what could you even say that's wrong about this movie? Every scene contributes to the plot or the theme. For example, after so much tragedy, Peter goes to smoke with his friends, which seems like something that he's done every single day, and then that triggers a really bad panic attack for him. Doesn't really move the plot along, but it's an exploration of grief that I've never seen anywhere else. A lot of people smoke weed, Exhibit A, and yet people never really seem to talk about the fact that even if you're a regular user, if your mental illness gets triggered, then weed becomes your enemy instead of your best friend. It was a brilliant and subtle indicator that this boy was going through it. There's so much other understated foreshadowing, and it obviously looks perfect, and I can't pinpoint what it is, if it's the coloring, the composition, or what, or if it's just because it's a running visual in the movie, but their house feels like a dollhouse to me. I feel like I am watching living animated dolls in a little dollhouse. It looks like we're almost not in real life. There's just so much control. I mean, there's a couple scenes, I think, where it transitions instantaneously from daytime to nighttime, and it feels like Ari Aster is playing God in a way. I'm sorry, I can't articulate this very well, but I'm not saying anything new at this point. It definitely completely holds up upon a rewatch. Up next, we have The Descent. Oh yes. This brutal and claustrophobic horror film follows a group of adventurous women as they explore an underground cave network. This movie is bonkers. Off the rails, the horror never lets up, like you never get a moment of goddamn peace when you're watching this movie. Also, apparently I watched the American theatrical version, and so the very ending of the movie is much different, and I thought that everything else about this movie was perfect leading up to it, but literally the last like 3 seconds ruined it. Oh, I was mad. There's a different ending that I vaguely remember from my first time watching the movie, and I hope to God that it's better. Luckily, I also do have the unrated original version on my Blu-ray, so I can go and watch that. If you haven't, I urge you, nay, implore you to watch this film. Go in as blind as you possibly can, because I promise it will have such a higher impact on you. Even if you know what's coming, this movie is uncomfortable and scary as f. I don't say that lightly because I'm desensitized to almost every form of horror at this point. This movie gets to me every time, especially because of the emotional aspect to it too. It's the opposite of Beast, where in Beast, I'm like, can we just stop talking about all your issues because we're not working through this well and it's very cliched. In The Descent, it just feels like it fits a lot better. It's just a group of fun, adventurous ladies that get stuck in a really bad situation. And a lot of it feels a little too real. My claustrophobia makes this an effective watch every single time. And I don't know why I didn't fully appreciate the movie until now. I rewatched it about 1.5 years ago and only gave it 3.5 stars. Like, it's not one of my favorites. Past Kylie, what the fuck are you talking about? Let's be real. It's one of my new favorites now. What can I say? Up next, I rewatched Bullet Train. I just knew that I wanted to see it as many times in theaters as I possibly could. Then my next rewatches were Valentine, Halloween, and Friday the 13th. I've talked about all these movies at length, so just gonna kind of whip through my thoughts here. I was on a date with somebody that had never seen Valentine, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on. So that became a priority, you understand. And if you haven't seen Valentine, it's time to change that. I adore that movie. So stupid. Incredible. As for the Halloween movies, I just don't really have any self-control. It is 102 degrees right now on the 1st of September in LA. How else am I meant to feel the supple caress of fall in this economy? I'm gonna have a Halloween marathon. Leave me alone. I know it's August, okay? Friday the 13th was another screening event that I went to at the Greek Theater. I got pulled aside by the event photographer, I think because I was wearing my Camp Crystal Lake counselor t-shirt. So I got some cute little pics in the canoe. This one made the website. And it was up at the Greek Theater near the Griffith Park Observatory, but it was out on the lawn. It was just such a perfect location for Friday the 13th up in the mountains. We got covered in dew though. It was remarkably dewy. Ha ha ha. I found a much deeper appreciation for Friday the 13th just watching it up in the mountains with that big crowd, and they were super interactive. So everyone was laughing at the bad acting and some of the corny action of the movie and cheering at the deaths. That's how 80s slashers are meant to be watched, not at home alone, which is exclusively how I've experienced these movies in the past. I get it now. The Gen Z kid gets Friday the 13th. Everybody clap. All jokes aside, I really do have a much deeper love for that movie now. But it's time to move on to all my new watches of old horror. Like I mentioned, this month, that is almost all completely Wes Craven movies, so I'm not going to talk about it because I do have a big Wes Craven week coming up. So the only other old horror movie that I watched that is not part of my Screambox wrap-up would be Tusk. Quite a choice, eh? This is about a podcaster who travels up to Canada to interview someone for his show, and he ends up in the home of a very eccentric retired ocean explorer. I really struggled to put my emotions into words with this one. I watched it when I was pretty geeked off an edible, which I don't recommend doing, just for your own well-being. But it did make the movie a jillion times funnier. That movie is hilarious at times, and these actors were working their asses off. Everyone did a phenomenal job in this film, and also whatever tone they were trying to impose worked. Whether it be a deeply satirical moment, a straight-up horror scene, or a character development moment, it all worked pretty well. I still only give it 3 stars because, yes, every tone was done well, but it was so much. Maybe not the most effective blend at genre bending, but also I really wasn't a fan of the ending. I get that it's a satire, but there were also some pretty serious character-driven themes that they didn't really bother tying up at the end. They just went for the goofiest possible ending. So there were just a ton of loose ends, and it made the beginning of the movie feel a little bit pointless. This movie is absolutely not going to be for everybody. The more that I sit with it, I feel like I really liked it. I was even close to giving it a higher score, but then I was like, no, I mean, all the individual bits I liked about it, but they didn't blend very well. I'm also thinking about giving it a dedicated review because because there's just a lot going on. And I really want to talk spoilers eventually, and so I'd probably do a proper plot breakdown. So that being said, gonna wrap it up and move on to all my watches of new horror releases. Kicking things off very strong with Prey. Set in the early 1700s, Prey follows Naru and other members of her tribe as they deal with the otherworldly threat of Predator. This was so good, biggest surprise of the year. And I'm so sad it didn't get a theatrical release because this movie is very grand. It's not larger than life, but it takes it back to the roots of Predator, where there's these great sprawling landscapes and amazing action. Just the fact that so much of it was done practically, it looks so good, you can tell. More movies like this. This and The Northman are two of my favorite movies of the year, mainly I think because of the practical landscapes. Has Marvel ever considered how good this looks? I mean, come on. Amber Midhunter is about to be our new Scream Queen, I'm calling it now. The absolute raw badassery exhibited by this woman was to die for. Dakota Beavers 2, wow. More period piece Predator movies, this was so good. To be honest, I've only seen the original Predator and this movie. From what I've heard, the rest of the franchise is pretty much a mess, so just give me more of this. Also had such a good message about female empowerment, might have been a little bit on the nose, but endearing nonetheless. Because I finished that movie feeling like I could beat up a bear. I mean, when people saw Amber Midhunter perfecting her axe throwing skills, people died. I can't recommend this movie enough, everything about it is amazing. If you like action, if you like horror, gore, period pieces, amazing acting, watching colonizers die, this movie has it all. Unfortunately, now we have to talk about a movie that has nothing at all. They Slash Them was probably one of the worst things that I watched this month that was not streaming on Screambox or a very early Craven movie. They Slash Them follows a group of teenagers at a gay conversion therapy camp, and they are subjected to all kinds of weird and horrible shit, as you would imagine. This movie is not only not gay, but it's one of the most boring releases of the year. And you might be thinking, wasn't this literally written by a gay man? What do you mean it's not gay? I'll tell you what I mean. They literally have a character in this movie who's voguing to Perfect by Pink. Need I really say more? Well, yeah, probably for my straighties out there. Let me tell you something about my people. I've spent a fair amount of time at the bars in Soho, London, gay district. Most of my friends are on the rainbow spectrum, and when I tell you that not a single gay soul that I know listens to Pink. Now, if it had been a Lady Gaga, a Britney song, I would have let that moment slide. But this movie is littered with stupid, out-of-touch moments like that. Moments that are supposed to be like, oh my god, totally gay, like that's so me. When in reality, it's almost worse than the really cheap stereotypes that we got in the early 2000s. I mean, there's one pretty stereotypical character in this movie, but for pretty much everybody else, they strip away all the fruitiness. I'm like, what's going on? If they're trying to get away from old stereotypes, then that's fine, but what ended up happening is the characters all became very boring and one-dimensional. No one has a strong enough vibe to attach yourself to. It's just a bunch of nothing characters. This movie also seems to beg the question, hey, I mean, what if conversion therapy camp was a little bit fun? Pardon? Everyone's giving this a harsh rating, but they're also saying, oh, Kevin Bacon was probably the best thing about this movie. I mean, maybe? There's nothing that he does in his performance that's much of anything crazy. There's so much nothing going on. There's no plot, no. They set up all the characters and their objectives, but there's not really any kind of plot beyond that. It's more like just breaking free of society's expectations and accepting yourself, I guess. But it's so lame. The main character even has this moment at the end that's supposed to be this big build-up and climax of them finally accepting themselves, but it's so flat and unearned because there was no plot leading up to that moment. Also, I'm gonna spoil the midway twist because you shouldn't waste your time on this movie. It becomes a slasher like 50 minutes in, and it is so lackluster. It's supposed to be this really shocking moment, and all it is this really lame jump scare with a really tame kill, and then it takes forever until we see that villain again. There's not another kill for, I want to say, at least 20-25 minutes. So lackluster. There's nothing about this movie to even like. So moving on. We're actually gonna have to take a brief intermission here, folks. The camera battery is almost dead. Also, I'm very hungry, so I will come back to you in a little bit.
2 hours later.
Wow, I'm back. Time travel. Alright, intermission over. Time to talk about Resurrection. This is a new Rebecca Hall psychological thriller. A woman's carefully constructed life gets upended when a shadow from her past threatens her peaceful existence. Oof. Just big oof. Resurrection and Rebecca Hall, I was rooting for you. The Night House from last year was amazing. You should definitely watch it if you haven't already. It scared the shit out of me. So when I heard about Resurrection, I was like, yes, I'm ready. And then I watched the movie and was just like, oh no. Oh, it's bad. People died, and not in a good way. I died because this was one of my most anticipated, and I trust this woman with my life, and this shit was so weird. It really fell apart for me. I like the first half hour or so. It sets up this really interesting but simple mystery, and then Rebecca Hall's character has this crazy backstory that just comes out of left field, and it's delivered via this insane monologue that she has. But anyway, then it devolves into something that is not right. It didn't disturb me in the right ways. It's kind of like when the friends were sharing funny sex stories and Chandler accidentally lets it be known that sometimes he sees his mom's face during sex.
I said share, not scare.
Yeah, that was the vibe. I was like, why the hell did you show me this? Because it was bizarre, but it wasn't even the most over-the-top crazy thing I'd ever seen. It sat in this weird kind of purgatory middle ground. Don't get me wrong, for the average moviegoer, this is gonna be foul, but as far as horror goes, you're just gonna be like, that was fucking weird. This movie goes down the toilet so fast. I really don't know what Tim Roth is doing there either. I used to be obsessed with his show Lie to Me when I was in middle school-ish, but woo, this one is a stinker. Do not spend the $7 or whatever it is to rent it. Just wait for it to be free streaming somewhere. Up next, we have Mad God that was released to Shudder, and this is apparently a stop-motion animation movie that was 30 years in the making. It follows the character The Assassin as he makes his way through some sort of hellscape. And don't get me wrong, it's clear that a lot of artistic vision went into this, and stop motion animation is no joke, but I'm not gonna sit here and act like I get this movie because I don't. The only thing that it offered me is that it's an insane filmmaking feat, and aesthetically it'll be great for some people. But there's not really any plot. This is one of those movies where it's more of a moving art piece that you watch for the vibes, and I just didn't like the vibes, so it's not gonna be for me. I only watched about 20 minutes of it. All respect to the creators, I can clearly see how much work went in, but that's not always enough, you know what I mean? I saw a tweet the other day that was like, if you knew how much work went into making movies, you would be less critical. You just would. And no, I know how hard it is to make a movie. I've microdosed that, funding, writing, directing my own short film. I've been on plenty of real film sets. It's usually hell on earth, but you can work your whole life on something. It doesn't mean it's gonna be good. And I'm not saying that Mad God is not good, because I think that that movie in particular is gonna be way more subjective than most other movies out there, but it's like working for a multi-level marketing scheme. Also, sorry, I'm really into anti-MLM content right now. You can work all day long, sending messages, bothering people that you went to high school with, posting about the products all the time, and not make any money. I see working on movies in the same way. Like, okay, you slaved away for 30 years making this movie. It doesn't mean that I have to think it's good. Again, I'm just using Mad God as an example to this point. Mad God itself is actually, it's a very impressive filmmaking feat, if nothing else. It's just not for me, and I feel like that's an important distinction that a lot of people cannot make. When a movie isn't bad, it's just not their cup of tea. I can see why Mad God would be a really good movie for people that enjoy having no plot and just crazy weird vibes. But moving on, Hypochondriac is up next. A gay Potter's life is upended when he starts to lose control of his body and suffers through manifestations of his childhood trauma. Y'all, this movie stinks. I want to root for this director because he's a champion of all things queer, and this is a queer story, kind of. When I say kind of, it's like he's a gay character who has a boyfriend, but it has no consequence on the story. Like, they could have been a heterosexual couple. Nothing about his gayness informs any of his interactions with anyone else in the movie or society. But I still want to root for this director because of gay, and because this was his directorial debut. But just like as I was saying with Mad God, just because something is a directorial debut, that also does not mean that I need to go easy on it. This movie is really bad, relies on cliches, has a super monotonous, dragging pace, and for it being more of a character study, we learn almost nothing about this individual. All we learn about is this painfully stereotypical mental illness plot that they cling to. With it being a debut, maybe it's kind of obvious that there would be cliches. Sometimes you have to master the basics before you can branch out and do something truly original, but it's also very experimental. Not so much with the shooting style, but definitely with the editing, and it's like, babes, maybe let's master the art of traditional cinema before we go doing all of that. Because it doesn't work. It's very weird and repetitive. Not to mention, now this is low-key a running theme. Much like Perfect by Pink did not belong in They/Them, Domino by Jessie J did not belong in Hypochondriac. Oh my god. Unless it was a cultural phenomenon type song, then I don't want a 9-year-old song in my horror movie. Why would you even blow the budget on licensing a song like that? Please make it make sense. More like Domino. Ugh. Oh my god, sorry. Last thing I will say is, like, if you're a new director, if you're gonna do something unoriginal, at least give it a little sauce. Make it different, have some fun. Try not to do it worse than the people who came before you. Now, Bodies, 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 I did a full review for already, so I would check out that video if you want to. A lot of behind the scenes interviews and fun stuff in that one. So up next would be Fall, and honestly, this is kind of a special movie to me. Fall is a one-location survival horror movie in which Hunter convinces Becky to climb up a 2,000-foot tall radio tower. The reason why this is special is basically because it unlocked a new fear for me. I never knew I had an issue with heights, was blissfully unaware. This movie did some insane shit to me, particularly in the way that it was shot. The entire first act, they're constantly reminding you how insane these characters are by showing you exactly what it is they're risking. There are so many bird's eye shots of how high up they are. There are some close-ups of all the rusty hinges and close-ups on Becky as she's freaking out. It's insanely effective. I can't even tell you the last time that a movie made me that stressed. Maybe The Invisible Man 2020. The problem is though, I don't think I would have felt that way if I wasn't in a theater. Being in the theater made me feel like I was in Soaring Over the World. I'm so dead serious. That's one of the best rides at Disneyland, by the way. They strap you in and they kind of hoist you up over this big curved screen, and it really looks like you are flying over these big old landscapes. From the camera's POV, I felt like I was sitting in a helicopter dangling my feet just watching these characters climb higher and higher. The first act establishes this space so well that you're just left with this residual stress for the rest of the movie. The reason why it was only a 3.5 out of 5-star movie for me though is because it was pretty cliched. It was very corny, just very predictable cheeseball kind of mess. I said this about Beast in my Patreon review of it, actually, that I wish they wouldn't try to shove so much character development into the story. I did prefer it in Fall because there is a nice theme about human resiliency, but then there's also this other character drama that is just so predictable and it's annoying. As I was mentioning about The Descent earlier, because there is really so little focus on her development, it ends up tying everything together really well with her as a character. The focus is not too heavily on the main character in The Descent because really it's all about being in this location and the stress of that. Beast was more about family relations, which didn't feel like it tied into the survivor narrative of the plot, right? I just want to watch a sexy man punch a lion in the face. Can we get back to that? At least with Fall, like I said, it felt topical to what the character was going through. Although, oh my god, it's always death. It's always grief with these goddamn survivor movies. Anyway, yeah, as I said, it's also very corny. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is there for about 5 minutes of the runtime, and his performance is really bad. I don't know what was going on there. But the lead actress who played Becky was great. I also love the actress who plays Hunter because you might recognize her from a little movie called Halloween, maybe? She plays the babysitter Vicky, and I adore her. Overall, I recommend Fall. I had a really good time. It's not going to break the mold of one-location survivor horror, but it's a really unique location with super effective cinematography. Next, we have Orphan First Kill, which I also did an entire dedicated review to, so definitely go check that out. That video is honestly really good. So let's talk about The Invitation, baby. The Invitation follows a woman who meets an estranged cousin who invites her to a posh wedding out in the UK. Everyone is hating on this movie. I really liked it. Even my dad enjoyed himself in this movie, and honestly, it's kind of for the girls. The Invitation, it's true, it's for the girls and the gays. It's a corny, cliched, mid-budget gothic horror movie, so naturally, I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's 100% just a crossover between Get Out and Ready or Not, but I don't care because those are two of my favorite movies. It also crosses over with another pop cultural phenomenon type movie that I adore, but I won't say what because that would be a spoiler. The lead is great. I love gothic horror. This movie is dripping in style. Huge props to the costume department and the hair and makeup. Everyone looked incredible in this movie. It's directed by Jessica Thompson, so it's shot through a very feminine gaze. You know, it's slightly erotic. I think it's a little bit debatable whether or not the female gaze exists, because if it does, it's not at all in the same capacity as the male gaze, which is disgusting, by the way. The female gaze is also so layered because most of the time it doesn't involve objectifying anybody. It'll be like, oh my God, did you see the way that he tucked her hair behind her ear? There's just so many more complexities to it, and this movie explored a lot of them. I loved the romance element too. It's just not that serious. It's clearly very derivative, but I had a lot of fun. Don't go out and see it if you're lame and you can't appreciate art that's made for women. Speaking directly to the men who so desperately want everyone else to hate Twilight as much as they do because they're jealous of the men in the movie, babes, unpack that. I can already sniff the dissertations coming of, oh, actually the Twilight movies are so bad because the unnatural dialogue and the blah blah blah. Shh, nobody asked you. I'll conclude by saying you should also go in as blind as possible because the trailer kind of ruins everything. So lastly on the docket for today would be whether or not I think that you should get the service Screambox. I got the free trial for a month, as I mentioned, and I have a ton of movies to talk about from it. But first I want to talk about the website because, it kind of sucks. You go on there and the layout of the interface is so bizarre because when you try to scroll, it's very sensitive, so it kind of bounces around, but it's not smooth at all. It's very jittery and buggy. Also, when you try to click on certain tabs of the website, it simply just does not work. The layout is much better on the TV, but it's still really buggy and sometimes just randomly logs me out. I chalk all this up to it being a very new streaming service, so these are things that I think will obviously be fixed over time. As far as the content, however, it's pretty booty. They have a couple classics like Slumber Party Massacre, Black Christmas. They've done some documentaries on classic films, which I'll talk about soon. Hell House LLC, the Ring You franchise, and Terrifier are also all on there, but aside from that, from what I could see, most of the rest of it is pretty low budget garbage. So let's get into that. We can kick things off with Pennywise, the Story of It. This is the documentary on Screambox that documents the making of the original It miniseries in 1990. There's not much to critique, really. It could have been a little more deep. I really wish that they had done a retrospective interview with Stephen King, but they did have some archival interviews with him that kind of made up for it. That felt like the only real area of lack. But I'll share some of the best fun facts and footage from the documentary when I do my It comparison. This is far and away the best original content that is on Screambox. The next thing that I watched was Babysitter Must Die, which is the first of many, many awful movies that I watched on Screambox. This is basically a babysitter ripoff where a cult breaks into a family's home and their babysitter tries to get them out of the situation. I have a little story to tell about this movie. I couldn't finish it. I lasted, I think, about 18 minutes or something, and so naturally I went on Letterboxd to do my thing, rip this movie a new anus. When, oh, what's this? The very top review was a 5-star review, and someone was saying how amazing the movie was and that the screenwriter must be so handsome. And my otherworldly, witchy intuition told me this guy is definitely the screenwriter. Sure enough, he is. Yup. And that was his second 5-star review of the movie and the second review in which he called himself handsome. Don't get me wrong, I'm hot and I talk about it, but there is a time and place. When I released Somnum, I logged it on Letterboxd and all I said was surreal. I did this so my followers on Letterboxd would see that they themselves could also give it a rating, but I remain completely impartial because I'm not corny. I also want my film to have an accurate rating. I didn't ask my friends or family to go and jack up the ratings with 5 stars. I know some of them did it anyways, but like, okay, my friend Tiago, he gave it 3.5 stars. I wanted honest critiques. So now my half-star review calling out this corny screenwriter is the top review of the film, and I'm sure he'll become aware of this very soon because he loves to go back and repeatedly rate his own movie. It's really not that deep, but it's just like, come on, man. Someone named Gary also gave this movie a really good review. It pretty much perfectly sums up all my thoughts, so you can pause and read it if you'd like to. Up next was unfortunately another movie that I couldn't finish called The Stairs. I'm not even gonna read the synopsis. I don't really know what goes down. Some people find some crazy stairs out in the woods. There's just a staircase out in the woods and weird stuff happens. I lasted maybe 10 minutes. It was so poorly made that it was making me feel ill. Sometimes really dog shit movies also have their place, but this just wasn't one of them. So after that, I decided to put on the Pet Sematary documentary. This was an interesting documentary for all the wrong reasons. It's definitely not as good as the It documentary because, surprisingly, they tried to cram too much in there, which usually I wouldn't complain about. There are just way too many interviews, and let me get into what I mean. They interview a quote horror fan? Like, that's so random. Why not me then? Throw me in the doc. And they interviewed everyone else, like location managers, everybody in the art departments, all of the actors, even the girl that played young Rachel. Like, what? They also interviewed Heather Langenkamp because her boyfriend of the time did the makeup on the movie. They also even interviewed the truck driver who was driving the truck in the scene where the child is hit. Do you see how they grasp at straws? They're interviewing the most random people. It's very strange. I did learn a couple of new things about the movie though through this documentary. Something that I need to correct actually that I learned through this documentary is that Stephen King's cat that inspired this story, his name was Smucky. So I don't know what interview I watched back in the day when I was doing my comparison on the Pet Sematary movies, but they said that the cat's name was Smutton. So that was wrong. Now I can make that correction. Oh well. Overall, I don't really recommend that documentary because there's just so much that's not consequential going on. They interviewed way too many people. And if you're a fan of the movies and you've already seen my original versus remake comparison video, then there's not really going to be too much more new information in that documentary. Humanoids from the Deep was the next thing that I watched on Screambox, and it was a pleasant surprise. This is a classic 80s piece about these half fish, half men that come ruin a 4th of July celebration. I love a good bad movie sometimes, and this is it. I think I only gave it 2.5 stars, but all the fun and the campy schlock and gore, it's there. It's worth a watch for the 80s heads, not really much else to say there. So moving on to Bad Moon, a little 90s werewolf flick. Don't really need a synopsis, it's a very simple werewolf story. This movie too has really good gore and better effects than it has any right to. It also has maybe the best dog actor I've ever seen. Max from The Grinch has some tough competition now, I'm so serious. But this movie overall is a 3-star lad for me. I made the note that it's not criminally underrated. I can understand why it's not considered a cult classic, but more people should talk about it for sure. I had literally never heard of it before I saw it on Screambox. If you're really into werewolf movies, this is a must-watch, that's for sure. Still quite schlocky, but not nearly as much as you would think from a random 1993 werewolf movie that you've never heard of before. I say give it a whirl. The last movie I watched on Screambox is called Starleaf, also the last movie I'll talk about today. A little micro-budget alien stoner horror flick. Basically, these 3 friends go up to Oregon to search for a special strain of weed called Starleaf that apparently is so good that people claim it was gifted to humans from another galaxy. This movie is absolutely terrible, but it maintained my attention the entire time. It has a lot of elements that I obviously love. It was so mind-numbingly stupid, and a lot of the comedy actually worked for me. Sometimes it's not trying to be funny, but it's just so bad that it's good. However, the one thing that's holding me back from telling you to watch this holy garbage is the fact that it boils down to saying that basically weed is bad. The story is way too centric on this Buzz Lightyear looking ass who just returned from the war, and he's so annoying. It's all about his journey working through his PTSD of murdering a child. Because there was some situation where, I don't know, it was really unclear. It was not shot well, so I couldn't figure out what was going on. But he basically had to make a choice where it's like, do I save my comrade and kill these evil people and their child, or do I let my comrade die? And it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe because you're only over there fighting for oil, maybe you don't kill the child. And in the end, he comes to the conclusion that he made the right choice in saving his friend, and that also no one needs to smoke weed. How are you gonna cater a movie to stoners in so many ways? Have all this stupid humor, it's about weed and aliens, and then go in that square-ass direction for the messaging of the movie. Boo. Boo, tomato. Another thing too that I thought would happen is that the boyfriend character would get his comeuppance because he was an asshole. He'd make these horribly annoying and misogynistic comments towards his girlfriend, like all the time, and it was never addressed, and he never had to pay for it or reckon with it. She would just be doing something innocent, like taking pictures of herself, and he would say something like, ugh, babe, your Instagram already has enough selfies of you on it. Who cares? If it makes her happy, shut the fuck up. Why do we normalize women being so micromanaged? Like, shut the fuck up. So even though there are many things that I love about this movie, and I probably would watch it again, I still could only give it 1 star. It's really quite terrible. I suppose it's time for my final consensus on Screambox, so let's tally up the score, shall we? There are a few things worth watching. I listed them off: Slumber Party Massacre, Black Christmas, Hell House, etc. And there are a few slightly hidden gems like Bad Moon and the Pennywise documentary. But you could watch everything that's worth watching in the span of a month and never have to pay for the service, you feel me? If you're not like me and you only watch maybe a couple movies a month or something, then maybe this would be worth it to you. It's only $4.99 a month. So that's a you call, because other than that, a lot of the content on there is pretty garbo. But I only really scratched the surface, so what do I know? I just think that to get Screambox, you really gotta be the the type of person that's willing to sift through all the garbage and find the roses between the thorns. I personally might keep it for maybe another month or so, but there's nothing else on there that I'm dying to watch. So again, like I say, do with that what you will. That is finally going to conclude everything that I watched in the month of August. And again, like I said, I did not even mention all of the Wes Craven movies that I watched. That's coming very soon though. I'm really excited for my Wes Craven week. Also, now that we're at the end, I would love it if you gave this video a like, drop a comment about literally anything that I talked about today. YouTube loves engagement, and make sure that you're subscribed. But if you'd like to help me out even more, as you could probably tell, this video took a lot of time to put together, and that would not have been possible without my patrons. So big thank you to all of these lovely people. I am so happy to have you on the team. I post a lot of bonus content over there. If you want to see my first reactions to movies like Fall, Day Shift, The Invitation, Beast, Tusk, that is all on Patreon. And sometimes I get really high for those videos. So I recommend it. It's $5 a month. Come join us over there. All the rest of my social media is linked down below, as well as some of my affiliate codes, so check it out. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!